Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Hanley Effect. I'm John Dyben.
I'm Rachel Docekal.
How you doing, Dr. D?
Hey, Dr. D, how are you?
I am very well. I'm excited today about our guest because I got to meet her recently. I actually got to hear her give a presentation, and then I served on a very little panel with her, and I just how you have these people that you meet, and intellectually you're just so impressed with how their brain works, and you kind of want to spend more time with them. So I remember walking away going, man, I hope I get to spend more time somehow with Dr. Judith Grisel, our guest today. Welcome, Dr. Grisel.
Great. You know what?
Grisel.
It's Grisel.
Yeah, I can't believe I did that. I kept telling myself it's Grisel, and I just said Grisel. Sorry.
It's like, a jinx. Yeah. Don't.
Right. If you think about it.
Right. I'm like that when I go skiing. I'll see one tree in the middle of the open glade, and I don't hit the tree.
Oh, you and Sonny Bono.
That's right. Well, I did. I was very excited. I am excited that you're here today. I really enjoyed getting to hear you and hear your thoughts and have some conversation with you. And I did walk away from that conversation going, man, I could spend some time with this person. And so we've got some time for everybody to enjoy that. I'm going to just let everybody know that Dr. Grisel is a behavioral neuroscientist. She is a speaker and an author. And she wrote the title of the book is Never Enough, the Neuroscience and Experience of Addiction. And what I love is that you talk about the science and the experience. And so, Dr. Grisel, we want to say welcome. Thank you for being here. And we'd love to just hear a little bit about you. Who are you and what are you doing? And I love to hear about the journey that got to where you are today.
Sure. I'd love to share it. I'm speaking to you from my office at Bucknell University, where I'm a professor in the middle of idyllic central Pennsylvania.
Beautiful.
But I had a circuitous route to get here. I started, I guess you could say, researching drugs when I was about 12 or 13. And the first 10 years or so were on the streets. I eventually, during that 10 years, I was kicked out of 3 schools. I contracted hepatitis C, sharing dirty needles. This was in the 80s, so I'm lucky it wasn't anything more serious. I was homeless, but mostly I ended up really in despair and self-loathing. I was, I thought drugs were helping me, but they weren't so much helping me. So I ended up in a treatment center. And it's a funny story because in the 80s, I had no idea what a treatment center was. And I thought it was going to be something like a spa, which I felt like I deserved after my really wreck of a life. So I got to the treatment center and they said, if you want to live, you're going to have to be abstinent. And I wasn't sure I wanted to live, and I definitely did not want to be abstinent, but I, somehow got the idea that maybe there was a third way. There would be some back door, there usually was. And so I thought, well, if I have a disease that's killing me, I could cure my disease. That's what people do with diseases. They fix them. And I was going to cure it. So I decided I would become a neuroscientist, which was really hilarious to me now.
So you could cure addiction.
So I could cure my addiction so that I could use with impunity. I was interested in maybe not self-destructing quite so fast. I was 20, just turned 23 when I ended up in a treatment center in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota. And anyhow, I thought I'll give myself 7 years, which will be just right. And then I'll still be just 30. So my whole life won't be over without drugs. And we're very determined and very, I guess you could say ambitious. I mean, I think one thing that people who end up like me have in common is that we do persist. We do push through difficulties, and we do, find a prize at the end of the track and drive toward it. And so that's sort of what I did. I mean, it wasn't pretty. It took me 7 years to get my undergraduate degree. Eventually, it wasn't so hard when I was awake. And then about 7 years in grad school, and then I did a postdoc, and then I became a behavioral neuroscientist.
So, yeah, of course. Ta-da! Yada, yada, yada. And I became right.
Well, John told me I was going to love your story, but he said, I am not going to tell you before the episode because, I want to see your reaction during the podcast. And wow, well done. Well done.
And so what is a behavioral neuroscientist? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, it's the most interesting kind of neuroscientist. I'm a psychologist. I'm a psychologist because I'm interested in behavior. And I think behavior, other than maybe, astrophysics, is probably the most interesting thing to study. It's the most complex. Human behavior especially is just so mysterious, and it's so important. It really, if we could understand human behavior, we would solve pretty much all of our problems, maybe not getting hit by meteors, but everything else. So I'm a psychologist, but I have a sort of thrust toward the biological mechanisms. I'm the kind of psychologist that likes to know mechanisms and that had no problem endorsing the idea that what was wrong with me started in my brain. I thought it was going to be kind of, an errant molecule or a bad gene or something really, simple. That's not the case because behavior is never simple. But I just go toward the biological mechanism. So that's the neuroscience part.
And so is your primary focus the studying the biological mechanisms of addiction?
Yes, and I spent 30 years or so trying to understand what's different. Maybe the last 35. What's different about my brain and people like me from people who don't go self-destruct with drugs? I mean, many people use mind-altering substances, and most of them don't have a problem, don't do what I do. So I thought that, something was different about the way I responded. And I figured if I could find that mechanism, then I could fix it somehow. And this is still kind of the biomedical model, you might notice. But, we think there's something wrong in our heads and that we can fix that. So I have done a lot of pharmacology experiments, a lot of genetics experiments. I've studied sex differences. I've studied the role of stress, the role of learning, the role of development, early exposure, late exposure, a lot of different kinds of drugs. And I published papers that very few people read, and, not too far in, maybe farther than it should have taken. I realized, wow, this is a complicated problem, and the science is important, but we're kind of missing the forest for the trees in some ways. And meanwhile, more and more people are dying. In fact, all the research that I have tried to do and other people have done all over the world, we still have more people dying of addiction today than we did when I was dying of addiction. So it's not an easy problem at all.
And so when you talk about missing the forest for the trees, is that what you're talking about? The actual problem itself is getting worse.
Well,
we're trying to understand
there's a lot of that metaphor fits a lot of things, but I think mostly or most compellingly, we have been looking inside people's heads for the problem. And I think that what we now know about the brain is it is in a social, cultural milieu, and that the context is so important. And so I don't think there's something wrong with my brain or other people's brains. I think my brain responds in certain ways that are assets in some conditions and social situations and liabilities in others. And I think understanding those sort of, that balance is really key to not saying, that to helping with this naive idea that we're going to fix addiction, the naive idea I had by changing the gene,
It's interesting. A lot of the work that we do is with the family system.
Right.
And, all of our treatment is completely individualized. So, what are the needs of that that patient, based on what their family system is, what their situation is. And, this is, an application of really what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's funny. I get asked all the time, so what does cause addiction? And I think there are three main streams, three main influences, one, all complicated. The first one is genetics. So we know that about half the risk is heritable. People are born with a certain proclivity and a certain bunch of proclivities that make things more or less likely. And then the other half is environmental, but a big part of that, about a third or more overall, is developmental. And of course, we're developing in the context of our families. So I think that, I certainly wouldn't want to say ever again, I think psychology has a history of blowing it in this way, saying that, it's the parents' fault. It's not. But I do think that none of us are islands. We grow up in complicated situations, and families have big impacts, but so do our neighborhoods, so do our schools, so do our all kinds of things.
So I'm thinking about the person who's out there, who's asking you these questions, who has no background. Maybe they've got a loved one who's struggling with addiction, and they're saying, that question, what's happening? Why are they, do they not love me anymore? Cause they're focused on the behavior, and they see a scientist and they think, you must tell me the exact reason. And you're at this point where you're saying that it is, I can't give you a simple answer. And I was wondering, are there, because I would like to talk about that a little bit more. I'd like to hear how you respond to the lay person. Actually, I'm going to ask you now, how do you respond to the lay person? Is it just giving, just like what you said just now? Or because I'm sure you get a lot of people who ask you, what's happening with my loved one or what's happening with me, that don't have any scientific background. And how do you approach that?
Well, I want to echo what Rachel mentioned earlier, that you kind of tailor your treatment to the individual. And I do think there's as many ways to become addicted as there are addicted people, in a way. We all have an individual path. And the common things about that are important, though. And what I would say is happening at the base of it all is that there, the value of mind-altering substances to our brains, and therefore to ourselves, grows over time. And it becomes so outsized that it really supplants every other value. This was certainly the situation with me. I was pretty full of dreams and interests and ambitions. I took my first drink, and, within basically months, my life was transformed, where now all I cared about, and I won't say all I cared about, but if you looked at my life, kind of all I cared about really was getting high. And that is a natural process that drugs are, expert at exploiting. And it's meant to help us figure out, what kinds of things do we really value, but drugs are kind of masquerading as really meaningful stimuli. So they kind of inhabit us to really change our thoughts and behaviors and feelings, to just orient toward those drugs. And that is a tough, it's not that I didn't care about my parents, or I didn't know in my head, that they should be important to me. It's just that really they were not. They could not be, because in the light of, what I was using on one hand and the other kinds of opportunities like social relationships or schoolwork or being outside in nature or whatever, there was just no contest. So I think that it's almost like being possessed in a way, and you have to, I feel like, um, my parents were very tough on me, and that's partly why I was homeless for a while. And I don't know, if it would look the same if everything was happening today. It's a much different world than it was in the early 80s. I feel for it, but they didn't really provide me the opportunity to just, I came home from college one year and I said, I just love marijuana and I'm really sorry you're not cool, but I'm going to smoke. and they said, well, we're not paying for school, and I was like, gosh, that's not very nice. So I dropped out. I dropped out because it didn't seem that important as smoking did, but they kind of stuck with that. And I think it was a hard thing to do. On the other hand, when I got ready for help, they were the ones who brought me. They literally flew me from South Florida to Minnesota and dropped me off. And it was, an amazing act of love. So I have raised 3 children. I understand what a fine line this is, how hard this balance is, loving and supporting, but also letting people realize their own consequences. Yeah.
I love that picture of possession. Like it just is so, it helps kind of separate the person from the condition, right? And because that person is still there, that and so many times there's this sense of I've lost my loved one, or I've lost that they're gone. And sometimes, things go to, terrible extremes, but for the most part, that person's still there.
But unrecognizable. I think
yes.
I really was unrecognizable. I think, and adolescents are tough anyway, but then
I was just thinking about that when you said possession. I thought
it's an easy thing with my own daughter. I remember, having struggles, and I had a wise friend who said, well, just be in the same room with her. And neither of us wanted to be in the same room with each other at all. She wanted to slam her door and I wanted to kind of slam my door and just like, fine, we won't. And so I said instead, because I was listening to my wise friend, well, we're just going to sit in the living room together. She was huffing and puffing and I have nothing to say. And so she was on her phone and I was not. I was just sitting and maybe reading a magazine or something. And then every once in a while she would pop up. And I mean, once in a while, oh, look what happened. This happened at school today. Or what do you think about this on TikTok or something? So we had like a minor bridge. But I also had the heavy hand. I when she went away to college, I told her I wasn't going to pay for her tuition if she tested positive. And I tested her. And I knew how to test her because I'd been through that a little bit myself. So I wasn't like, just don't do this, which, anyway, I realized probably wouldn't be a good thing. And she was furious. She said, well, I might just go to Florida and be a waitress, which is kind of how I self-destructed. And I bit my tongue and I sat on my hands and I said, it's your life. I realize I can't control you, but I'm not paying tuition. And she just graduated in 4 years.
All right. Congratulations.
3.9 almost, and is brilliant and wonderful and talented and amazing. And she turned 21 in college and she said, well, can we reconsider this? And I did and she did it so smartly based on brain science. She said, Mom, when you're 21, your brain's a lot more developed. Of course, she knows I know because I've been telling her this. And I'm 21 now. So what do you think? And I said, okay, well, that's fair. We'll reconsider if we see any changes. And I am happy to say, 2 days ago, the whole family celebrated her graduation.
Wonderful.
That's so great. I love that, sometimes people think if you work in addiction treatment or something that we have this, moralization, that nobody should ever use any substance ever. And the truth is that most Americans use substances to some degree. And just like you said, statistically, the truth is that most will not develop problems, but those that, I always tell people if, that, cause that 50% of, what causes addiction, that's that big question, but we know that we know that there are genetic elements to it. If you look at your risk factors, you think about, it's like anything else. And it is not about something being some immoral thing or wrong thing to do inherently. It's about understanding your own risk factors, like with any other health decision you make.
And really, I think the biggest risk factor is using while your brain is developing. And I don't know if it's the biggest incendiary factor. It's the catalyst. So we might have all the genetic predisposition, or we might have a stressful life, but it's really putting potent mind-altering drugs on a developing brain that accounts for most of substance use disordered people. And so it's very important. I think if I had to point to one thing, for me, it was, being barely 13 and getting loaded for the first time and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't have to grow up. I can just stay here. So if we can provide the incentives and the constraints to help keep young brains safe longer, then I think that, and it is both incentivizing and constraining. It's not one or the other. Then I think we'll have a much better shot. Yeah.
What are your thoughts about young people and phones? You mentioned TikTok, for example, and those algorithms that really do cause us to just keep scrolling and keep scrolling and keep scrolling.
Yeah, I'm scared to death, and not just the TikTok, but I think the Pornhub and the gambling sites those are like having fentanyl in your pocket. I think the data is growing that these are devastating young people as much as alcohol or weed or even opiates early on. So when all of those things, the social media likes and the pornography or whatever it is, the cannabis, those things are all reinforcing. They're all pleasurable stimuli. And the bottom line is that the brain gets insensitive. It desensitizes itself to repeated stimulation with pleasure. You just cannot keep going back to the same honeypot without making the honey bland.
Right.
And so then we overeat because we need more and more and more, and then it gets less and less sensitive. So it is really a dead end. And I'm very concerned that, what young people especially, aspire to and need are social interactions. What they're getting is, virtual interactions, which are not. What they need is, awkward foreplay. And what they're getting is, something through the roof. I think that we are really, and the thing about the desensitization, and what they need is natural risk. And what they're getting is in debt. Those things are all good drives, but they come in sort of physiologically relevant amounts in the normal course of growing up. And by normal, I mean like the course that has happened through thousands of years of evolution,
right?
Not the course that happens in the last 10 years where, they're on their own with pretty much like the equivalent of fentanyl on, in both hands. So I think what happens is that desensitization to pleasure, to reward, to meaning, to what matters in their lives is happening just at the time when they're supposed to figure out what matters in their lives. And so when they're desensitized to it, then they naturally are depressed and anxious. So I think it's devastating.
I think we are going to see, and we're already starting to see it, but I think we're going to see a devastating impact on interpersonal relationships. With this generation that's coming up now. You mentioned Pornhub, and I just read a study. I wish I could remember who the authors were, but I just read a study that was a survey taken of young people. And what they came back with is that the young women were reporting very high levels of when they were having their first sort of, fumbly interactions. They were reporting that the male was slapping, biting, and spitting on them. Three different things that, were tracked immediately back to porn. And I guess the young men thinking that this is how you treat your partner.
Because they're insensitive to the normal stimulation, the normal level of stimulation. It's devastating. I think there was an article in the Atlantic this month actually on that and reported on that report that you just listed. So maybe we read the same thing, but the young men are showing up in my office on a college campus and they're impotent. They're 18 years old and they're now out of their homes. They're away from their parents. There's all these beautiful co-eds and they don't feel anything. They don't know how.
Because they're so desensitized.
Because they've been interacting with a very intense, in your face, as much of what you want, when you want it, the way you want it, louder, more intense, all the time, that there's no, how do you get from here to there? There is no, the fumbling part is kind of cut off at the knees. So I think that, there's a lot of beauty in that. I mean, it is really the anticipation, the slowness, the delicacy of dopamine, I would say, that leads to the sort of pleasure that's healthy and lasting, but that's not what they're getting. That's not what the advertisers are promoting.
And you use an important word, risk, real risk. When I'm engaging in a human relationship, there's risk. There's a little danger. There's uncertainty. And so what I'm hearing is that without that, that's part of the package, that has to be part of the package in order to develop like healthy, growth along the way. And when you have that
risk helps us to govern our own behaviors too. And, develop healthy empathy for somebody else because you're feeling those feelings yourself.
And for young people, for young people, that risk is what motivates them to get out of the house, to become their own selves. They're not their little parents. They are until they hit puberty, and then they're, some totally different animal. And
that's true.
And and that
don't we all know it?
That one is one that is kind of crazy. Is kind of like, why are they doing these stupid things? They were completely fine, 2 years ago, but now they won't listen to a thing I say. But that is natural and good because they might be physicists or musicians or rock climbers, when we wanted them to be accountants, let's say. And I think they have to find those things by taking risks, by exploring, and also, so not just trying out sexual partners, but trying out interests, trying out likes and dislikes.
New foods. All those things.
And if they didn't take risks, they would never leave home. Right? And we want them to leave home.
We call those young people failure to launch, and we treat them. We treat them.
And one reason they don't launch is because they've numbed that risk thing. So they now can't find the normal kind of titillation from trying out a new job or trying out a new date or trying out a new class. That is just not doing it compared to, say, staring at a screen and playing a video game that's, over the top, which is going to numb your sensitivity to those things. When I was smoking all the weed in my own adolescence, I remember thinking there's nothing I would least like to do than go spend time with my family, which was just so boring compared to what? Compared to sitting on my couch high as a kite, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think of just the experience of going into a movie theater, where really everything, they dim the lights and the sound is really loud and what you're seeing is huge in front of you. I certainly enjoy going and seeing a movie, but when I leave, all of my senses feel exhausted. I walk out of there sort of, that was great, but I'm spent now.
Right.
And it's exactly the type of thing that you're talking about, but 24/7.
And we could measure that by saying, let's go back and look at a movie made in 1970 or Star Wars or something, that was at the time was just amazing. But now people look at it and they're like, this thing is quaint, right? It's not even, there's hardly any action. So we've changed our baseline. We now need it to be so amped up to even attract an audience. And that's exactly what we're saying. That happens to individuals as well as society. Yeah.
So our brains are all of us to some degree are having that desensitization. And so it sounds like I need to find more moments and ways to get, is it possible to get that sensitization back?
Well, this is a very important question. I think to some degree, yes. I think for some people more than others. I think if you are young, when you lose your sensitivity, and you'll be more quick to gain it back if you're also young. But if you're young, you're going to lose the sensitivity when you're younger more readily. And that is because it's a form of learning. So the brain is learning, it's adapting, and young people adapt better and in both directions. So they're going to become desensitized quicker, which is why they're so at risk for developing substance use disorders in the future. But they're also going to resensitize more quickly. I think that all of us, though, to some extent are numb. And the solution is to try to amp up your acuity. And I remember the first time I went camping in Utah, I got there and I thought, my gosh, it's just brown, who cares?
Right.
Well, 3 days in the canyons, I was like on my knees about the colors. It was purple and orange and pink and yellow and green, and I couldn't see that. So I do think that walks in the woods, sitting with one person with no phones, nothing on the screen, maybe no music, just a conversation, baking slowly. I mean, our great resource is our attention. So putting our attention in the here and now, it's actually kind of like the canyon walls. It's rich. It's just that we miss it with all the loud noise and bonging bells and everything.
We are, I love it too. We are participating, or our patients are participating in a study, a research study that has them near a body of water. So it's the sounds of water, the sight of water, but really the sounds of water for 23 minutes a day for a period of time. And we are measuring. John is not only our chief clinical officer, he is also our chief research officer. But this study is, I will say when I first heard about this, I mean, I'm a bit of a nerd, so I thought, oh, that's cool. But I also, in the back of my mind, I thought, why 23 minutes? Why not, I'm a reflection of our society, right? Why not 4 hours?
Right.
23 minutes. And we are seeing efficacy from this. And Hanley has been around for 40 years. We sit on 14 acres of botanical gardens, and part of our campus is by a very small, but by a lake. And, we can't understate the effects that nature has. We say our grounds are healing. They're sacred grounds.
The power of assigning a patient every day to go out and feed turtles in the pond. Yeah. It's incredibly grounding, and it just goes to what you're talking about. Those moments, and I love how you put it, the power of our attention, because with the question, can we get that sensitivity back? It sounds like for us, old people like me, like it may be a little slower, but finding moments to be truly present. Sounds like that's your prescription.
Yeah. The brain will always adapt until the day we die, even if we're 106. So I think, not to say that old people, because old people, we all can get better. But I think the really potent opportunities are with young people feeding the turtles. Absolutely.
Well, it is my job. I'm the guy who gets to say we have to wrap up.
Yes. And I always give them the stink eye.
I know, because
especially today,
right now. But we like to have, we like to give the last word to our guests always. And so a lot of folks listening, there are parents, there are professionals, there are non-professionals, there's people who know about recovery and people who don't, and scientists and non-scientists are a wide variety of people. And so thinking about the people that are listening today, is there one last message or one thing that you would want them to hear from Dr. Judith Grisel today?
Oh my gosh, I feel like we've said a lot, but I will quickly reiterate a few things. One is that the brain is going to adapt to compensate for regular stimulation, whatever it is. And it's going to adapt by becoming less sensitive to that very thing, so that we're kind of digging ourselves into a hole. That's a fundamental aspect of neuroscience. Another thing I would say is that there's always hope. And the brain is very adaptable, and that realizing that hope requires paying attention.
I love that. Thank you, Dr. Grisel. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Dr. D.
Thank you, Dr. D.
Always loved you in this.
I know. This was one of my favorite episodes. Thank you.
I told you.
Right.
I told her. I told her she was going to love getting to know you.
I'm such a nerd that I love stuff like this. I mean, I'm going to go, and I'm quite sure that you are well published. So I'm going to go and Google some of the stuff you've written.
Well, I hope you will. And I hope if you read the book, Never Enough, you let me know what you think. And also I have a warm spot in my heart for Hanley, because I was at that campus during my intake. My parents brought me up there. I was hit bottom in South Florida. I went to that campus. I sat in some office. They said I was, in dire straits. And, so I owe you. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome to come back anytime and speak to our folks and get to know us. Thanks again. Thank you, everybody who is listening or watching. We'll see you next time on The Hanley Effect.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for The Hanley Effect. To learn more about our programs, visit hanleyfoundation.org or call 844-502-4673.